Trump might keep insisting it was the perfect call, but as testimony goes on in his impeachment inquiry, more and more questions are being raised about that conversation with Ukrainian President Zelensky. The National Security Council's top Ukraine expert, Alexander Vindman, listened to that call and testified yesterday that he tried and failed to correct at least two aspects of the so-called transcript, a claim that flies in the face of this one from the president.
I had a transcript done by very, very talented people, word for word, comma for comma, done by people that do it for a living. We had an exact transcript.
But at issue in that transcript, according to multiple reports about Vindman's testimony, was one place where there were ellipses, which the White House said indicated a pause. But Vindman says Trump was at that point telling Zelensky there were tapes of Biden. And another issue was a place in the transcript where Zelensky promised Ukraine's prosecutor general would, quote, look into the situation specifically to the company that you mentioned in this issue. But Vindman says Zelensky specifically mentioned Burisma at that point, which, as you know, is the company on which Biden's son sat on the board. Of course, while most are concentrating on the daily drama unfolding in D.C., the situation in the Middle East is more uncertain than ever, with Russia stepping in to fill the vacuum left by U.S. troops pulling out of northern Syria, and new leadership ahead for ISIS after the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Earlier today, I was joined by one of the most qualified people in the country to weigh in on all these issues, and she's had a thing or two to say about them in recent days. Susan Rice served as National Security Advisor under Barack Obama, as Ambassador to the UN before that. She also served in the National Security Council and as Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs under Bill Clinton. Her new book is Tough Love, My Story of the Things Worth Fighting For. Ambassador, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here.
What worries you most about Donald Trump's foreign policy?
Jim, what worries me most is that it is not designed to advance the national interest and our national security. And that Zelensky phone call transcript is a perfect example. Rather than raise any of the issues about which the United States has traditionally been concerned on a bipartisan basis, the Russian invasion and occupation of the country, the need to keep sanctions on Russia, the need to support the government of Ukraine economically, politically, and militarily. None of that's in there. It's all about what can you do for me. And so what worries me most is that he is subordinating our national interests and the country's interests to his personal political and perhaps financial interests.
Chuck Todd from Meet the Press is with us on the radio every Thursday, and he wouldn't say he was doing it for his interest. He's told us he is doing it for Volodymyr Putin's interest, that he essentially is implementing Russian foreign policy goals. Do you agree with that?
I don't know why he's doing it, apart from what he stated directly, which is help me, do me a favor. But one thing I think we can't escape is the reality that so much of what is inexplicable about his approach to national security is beneficial to Russia and detrimental to the United States, denigrating our intelligence community and law enforcement and in front of Vladimir Putin, yielding territory in Syria so that Russia can take our place and literally take our bases. This whole conversation with Ukraine where he was trying to dredge up false information that would discredit the notion that Russia interfered in our election in 2016, which has been validated again and again by all sorts of bipartisan inquiries as well as the intelligence community, and try to blame it on Ukraine. There's so many aspects of what he does and says that make no sense if you're serving as President of the United States.
Would you accept the notion that he might even be acting at the direction of Vladimir Putin, or is that a step too far?
I haven't seen evidence that would lead me to draw that conclusion, but certainly there are many, many questions.
Another motivation, quite clearly, is to undo whatever your former boss did, whether it's the Iran nuclear deal, the reopening of the relationship with Cuba, obviously the Paris Climate Accord. Is there a policy motive? Maybe you're not the right person to ask, but I think you may be. Is there a policy explanation for any of this other than the fact that what Barack Obama did, I shall undo? I'm serious. Is there more to it?
Well, if there's more to it, it's not clear what it is, because in each of these instances, it's not that the president has an alternative approach or a plan B. Pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement and his only approach is to deny climate change, or pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, which was beneficial to the United States, and saying that you'll negotiate bilateral agreements in his place when we're locked out of the benefits that we negotiate. Makes no sense. I could go on and on, but it's not clear that he has alternative plans, alternative strategies that would serve the U.S. interest better than what he thinks Barack Obama did.
You know, I'm assuming that in more of your capacities, you work with Bob Corker, former senator from Tennessee, who was the Republican chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. His quote a year or so, maybe more ago, was the generals are what stand between Donald Trump and chaos in this country. And most of the generals are gone.
He also said something about the White House being an adult daycare.
So he said both those things. We'll get to daycare later. Maybe. What stands between, if anything, what stands between Donald Trump and chaos today?
I'm afraid increasingly little, if anything. And I'm not sure that the generals were able to do, I'm sure they stopped some things, and so did civilians. But what we're seeing now is the complete breakdown of the national security decision-making process. There is no regular gathering of the cabinet-level principles that I chaired and write about in the book, Tough Love, that in any way, shape, or form provides informed guidance to the president. And even if it did, the president has demonstrated that he doesn't care what his advisors think. He's going to do what he wants to do, and that's exactly how we ended up with the abrupt withdrawal of our forces from Syria, the Taliban being invited to Camp David, and warplanes being 10 minutes from bombing Iran.
You know, most people, I amongst them, know you for your public positions. The thing I love about your book is the intimate detail about your personal life, from kiddom to adulthood and being a mother and all. Your son is a conservative Republican. Is that right? He's head of Stanford. Look at the look on your face. Stanford Republican.
He was, until very recently, the president of Stanford College Republicans.
Well, is he a Trump supporter?
You know, he's more of a traditional conservative.
You know, we have people on the radio call us, I mean this sincerely, all the time, who say, I don't speak to my father anymore. I don't go to Thanksgiving. I'm serious. I separated from my fiance of 10 years over the political divide in this country. How do you navigate that with your kid?
I love my son, and my son loves me. And we have a family where my daughter is quite progressive. She's younger. She's in high school. My son is quite conservative. My husband and I are in between, trying to keep the food from flying at the dinner table. But we raised our kids to think for themselves and to be independent and confident in their views. And unfortunately, that's what happened. You know,
speaking of your daughter, you again share some pretty intimate things with us. Most of America, I mean, most of the government infrastructure knew about your important work for decades. Most of America met you on those 5 Sunday talk shows you did 5 days after the assault on the embassy there in Benghazi. We all lived through, obviously most people watching remember you saying spontaneous demonstration in response to an anti-Islamic video. Turns out there was a terrorism link. You talk about what the criticism, the torrent of criticism that was directed at you after that did to both your mother and your daughter. Can you share that with us?
Well, Jim, I shared these personal details, and I'll explain for viewers what that's about. But I want to explain why I did it. And that's because I think whether you're Democrat or Republican, you know, progressive or conservative, when you are in the hot seat in Washington and personally attacked and your integrity and truthfulness and competence impugned, as mine was for a period, people may not realize that it affects not only the person who's being targeted, but the people who love that person and the people who work with that person. And so the politics of personal destruction, which have become so commonplace in Washington, don't come for free. My daughter experienced, in the wake of my appearances on the show at 9 years old, what can only be described as hallucinations. She was seeing images of men coming at her out of walls. And we took her, obviously, very concerned to be tested for weeks. They were worried that it could be a brain tumor or schizophrenia or some other kind of psychosis or a vision problem. And thankfully, they ruled out all the worst-case scenarios. And we're left to conclude that in all likelihood, she was experiencing a stress reaction to what happened to me. And we as parents didn't realize that with the TV on in the background, she was absorbing more than all that we were trying to tune out.
It was tough for your mother, too, and your mother told you not to go do those 5. What'd she say? I smell a rat?
My mom was a brilliant, accomplished woman, and also very direct. And when I told her on the Friday night that I'd just been asked to go on the shows, and that wasn't my plan for the weekend, I was trying to take my kids to a football game at Ohio State, but that I had agreed to do it as a team player. She really urged me not to, and she said she smelled a rat, and her intuition, or maybe her experience, led her to believe that, I would become a target regardless of, what I did or said.
Is this with you all the time?
No,
still?
thankfully, no.
It isn't?
No.
Is that really so?
Absolutely.
You're able to, okay. Why are you not running against Susan Collins? You have Maine connection, and there were rumors that you were serious. She is, I read the poll this morning after Mitch McConnell, the second least popular United States senator, very vulnerable, very important, her defeat to the Democrats retaking control of the Senate. Why aren't you challenging her?
Well, I thought about it, and I looked at it carefully, and most importantly, I talked to my family at length. And this wonderful 9-year-old daughter is now almost a 17-year-old high school junior, thankfully very healthy, very happy, and successful. But she had a mother who, for 8 of the years of her life, was either living in a different town when I was UN ambassador, or was working crazy hours when I was national security advisor. And we concluded as a family that this really wasn't the time to put more stress on her and on our family by uprooting and moving to Maine, where we do have a house, but we spend mostly summertime there, and causing her to, have to change gears in the middle of a critical year in high school.
How much of the crap you've had to endure in your public, that's a term of art, by
Yes,
the
of
way,
course.
in your public positions, most particularly around the Benghazi thing. You tell a wonderful story about approaching a former Fox News producer, asking why did you become the target, and that person said, everybody needs a villain, and Jay Carney wasn't the right guy. You were. How much of the criticism of you do you think is because of your gender and the color of your skin?
Jim, I was raised not to always be quick to ascribe any criticism, any attacks on me as being about race or gender. And so that's not my explanation of first resort. I think there are lots of reasons why I was an attractive target. One of which was my closeness to President Obama. Another was the fact that I was a face that they could loop video on, given that I made 5 appearances on the Sunday shows. But I do also think that, and I think more than anything, President Trump has validated this notion that there is something alluring and attractive to a certain segment of Fox viewership. To go after people of color, and particularly women of color. And so maybe to an extent that I didn't fully appreciate at the time, there was a subtext as well there that some found useful to exploit.
I hope I don't mischaracterize this, but you seem to be a relatively optimistic person about the future. But is that a fair statement?
I'm an optimistic person about our potential as a nation to grow and heal, but I'm not optimistic about the moment we're in.
Well, I'm not talking about the moment. I mean, when you just described what you described, a president who, I can't remember what the line for the Democrat who was asked in a gubernatorial debate in Florida whether the president was a racist, and he said, I don't know if he's a racist, but I know that racists think he is.
I've called him a racist.
You have called him a racist. How does that get, if Trump disappears in January of 2021 or January of 2025, or he's impeached and convicted, how does that divide the depth of the racial animosity in this country? That doesn't just disappear when the man who fomented it disappears, does it?
But Jim, it's not just about racism. America's come through, extraordinary history with respect to race, and it's not a linear progression that we've made. We've had setbacks and fits and starts, but we're a different country today than we were, for example, when my father was born in segregated South Carolina in the heart of Jim Crow and lynching in 1920. What's so disturbing about this moment is that with respect to race and immigrant status and religion, including anti-Semitism, you could name all sorts of ways that we have leadership who sought to divide us and to seek political benefit by exacerbating those divisions. And frankly, not just the president. It's others, unfortunately, in his party. The best example I can give, which is just nuts, is when members of Congress and others went on Fox News and tried to denigrate Colonel Vindman, who is an immigrant, a refugee from the Soviet Union, who came to this country at 3 years old, and a Jewish emigre, and tried to suggests that he was un-American, that he was
President
serving as a
called him
spy.
a never-Trumper as well.
But to suggest that he had divided loyalties, that's the height of an anti-Semitic trope. And that's what we're dealing with. So, again, it's not just about racism, and it's frankly not just about Trump. We do have to recognize that we're at a crossroads, as I write in the last chapter of the book. We're either going to recognize that we are stronger as a unified democracy in which we can learn to respect one another and get along as I do with my family and my son, whom I love to death. But we differ, and it's not easy. But I'm not going to pretend that we don't have our robust arguments and points where we both throw up our hands. But at the end of the day, we recognize that we are family. That what is important is that bond, and we're not prepared to sacrifice it. Similarly, on a national level, we have to decide that at the end of the day, we have more in common as Americans than we have standing divided and isolated. Our adversaries like Russia want nothing more to see us chew each other up from inside. Then they never have to fire a bullet to defeat our way of life, to defeat our democracy. And the only good news in all of this, and this is why I remain an optimist, is that this is a problem of our own making, our domestic political divisions. And therefore it's a problem we have the capacity to solve, just as we've come through periods of far worse division from the Civil War to Vietnam and the Civil Rights era, and we've come out whole. We can do this if we choose to, and if we select leaders who actually care about this country and the unity of this country.
From your lips. Pleasure to meet you, Susan
Thank you.
Rice. Thanks so much.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Terrific book, Tough Love, My Stories of the Things Worth Fighting For.